Well, we're just over a week into the month-long Loblaw boycott by some Canadians. People are targeting the massive company in part because of its record profits. The CEO at the time, Galen Weston, appeared before a parliamentary committee a year ago.
You know, we feel and understand that 95% of Canadians are concerned about food prices. But grocery chain profits are not the reason for food inflation. And as I mentioned...
Profit is too much profit.
Well, so a company needs some degree of profit. That's why we need all to work together.
How do you square that? How do you square what you're saying with the fact that you're experiencing unprecedented profits while people are struggling?
Well, that was federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh asking the questions to Galen Weston, who stepped down as Loblaw CEO, but he remains the board chair. Now, a lot of people are not satisfied with the answers, and so they've joined the boycott. Today on the show, we'll hear from people who are participating, how the price of food is affecting people, and some new data that shows a growing number of people in Saskatchewan who aren't able to access fresh, healthy food. We want to know, how is the current cost of food affecting you? Are you participating in the Loblaw boycott? Why or why not? You can call us at 1-800-716-2221 or email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, one of our guests for the show today is Keith Willoughby, Dean of the Edwards School of Business at the U of S. Keith, hello.
Good afternoon, Alicia.
Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
I'd like to get at some of the context here. Like, how did we get here? Why are some people choosing to boycott Loblaws this month?
I think the Loblaws boycott is partially driven by the fact that Loblaws is the main player in a very concentrated set of major companies when it comes to the grocery industry. Right now, there are generally 5 main players in the country, and Loblaws is the biggest. I think that's helping to really encourage some of the concern that consumers across the nation are feeling when they see the profits earned by the chain and its size and extent as it goes across the country.
How did it become the biggest player on the grocery scene? And I mean, they do sell more than groceries, and that has come up in conversations with Galen Weston, that they do more than that, right? They've got pharmacies, all of that. But how did they become the biggest player in the market?
Well, through conglomerations, through additions, through mergers, and taking companies under their umbrella and under their wing. If you look back maybe 30, 40 years ago, Canada had about 8 major players in the grocery industry, and now we're down to 5. So you got Loblaws, you got the Sobeys/Safeway chain, Metro, primarily in Eastern Canada, along with Costco and Walmart. So those are the 5 main ones, but Loblaws, because of its market position, exerts some influence because of its size. In fact, in recent data, Loblaws has about 29% of the grocery market share across the country, just in that company itself. And maybe that's the reason why they've incurred a bit of the concern from the Canadian consumer, and perhaps why now we're seeing some of the initiatives being launched, trying to provide more realistic opportunities for grocery consumers in the country.
How do their prices compare with other grocery stores, sort of in general? How do they compare?
Alicia, that's a great question, and one that's I wish there was a better answer. And I've found through the research I've done and looking at some of the websites that exist, it's rather hard to determine. I think a lot of us here in Saskatchewan, if we follow the flyers, if we observe websites, and we can keep track of prices, maybe have a good idea. But to the best of my knowledge, there's no one standard across the nation that does provide you with that real-time snapshot of prices in major grocery stores. There are some websites. GroceryTracker.ca is a website that does claim to survey prices across the nation. But generally, their prices are more in the Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver area, so it doesn't really impact the Saskatchewan consumer as much. My sense is that consumers, if they're willing to shop around, they can find the deals. The challenge, though, with the consumers is that when you see this growing trend, post-pandemic especially, of prices beginning to rise and increase, and meat products and other items that are costing a lot more than they used to, I think that's what really frustrates individuals in terms of their willingness to stretch an already thin dollar in terms of meeting the needs for feeding their own families.
We're going to talk about all the reasons why we're seeing this increase in food prices, and it gets quite complex. We've got an expert joining us a little bit later on the show who looks at access to food and has looked at some of the data that shows just how much people in Saskatchewan are struggling to buy groceries. But I have a couple of other questions for you first. Why do you think grocery prices, why do you think we've seen such an increase?
In my mind, it's unfair to pin the blame completely on the pandemic. I would say that there are, even before the pandemic, when you've got this growing concentration of players in the Canadian grocery industry, I think that drop in competition will enable an environment in which you may not have those competitive prices that exist. So I think that's one factor that's led us to high prices. We are facing supply chain challenges in terms of getting items to where they're needed. We have had weather challenges, climate change issues. We've had crops that have been impacted throughout the world, and that's leading to situations where prices are now beginning to rise because of some of the scarcity of products that are available. We're, again, in a post-pandemic bubble. We're seeing inflation that is unlike anything we as Canadian consumers have seen probably over the past 30 to 40 years. So food prices are beginning to ride a bit of that wave of the inflationary cycle. I think the challenge for the consumer at the end of the day is food is that one item that has such an inelastic demand. And when I say that, companies can charge higher prices, but it's generally not going to impact the final demand of the consumer. You've got to buy food to eat, and you need to eat to live. And so as consumers, we're in a situation now where it's the necessity of life. And I think that's what's really incurring the frustration of the consumer, because we feel we're sort of at a crossroads here with no advocate for us.
You know, that is similar to what I heard from a social scientist named Philip Loring. His research area looks at food and food systems. So he's an adjunct professor at the University of Saskatchewan and at the University of Guelph. Let's listen to his perspective on things.
For the last 50 years or so, consumers have benefited from what I would call cheap food policy in North America. There's been a variety of mechanisms in place related to subsidies to farmers and a variety of other sort of federal things in the States and in Canada that have been sort of oriented towards keeping food prices relatively stable, and they've been relatively stable when you take the long view, and relatively cheap through subsidization. What's happening now, I think, is that system is starting to get destabilized by global events, by climate change, and sort of we also have more corporate consolidation. The 50 years ago, you didn't have just a handful of companies owning all of the grocers and having all this vertical integration across the supply chain. So I think in the last few years, globally, changes have been really tremendous to climate, to society. The private sector has changed a ton over the last few years. And so I think the upshot of all of that is that old regime that was keeping food prices relatively stable is destabilizing. And that's sort of expressing itself in a variety of ways related to food prices that affect everybody.
So that's Philip Loring. He's a social scientist in the areas of food and food systems. Keith, I want to play for you the second part of what he has to say that gets into the aspect of transparency. And the reality is that we sometimes don't know what is causing food prices to go up. So let's listen to more of what Phil has to say.
Well, I think that right now there's not enough information. It's not transparent enough to really know what's happening with that. We don't get full disclosure about why grocers are setting the prices what they are. We don't have information about what's happening before grocers in the supply chain. Right? We know there's a lot of opportunity for decisions to be made for agency in parts of the supply chain to set prices, and we saw that with the bread price fixing scandal in Canada. For 15 odd years, private sector actors across the supply chain were inflating, including to inflate the price of bread. And so we know that there's a track record there. We know that this is happening south of the border. And we just need more transparency about why these prices are what they are so we can look at it. Is it the war in Ukraine? Is it climate change? It's very politically expeditious right now to talk about the carbon tax, but we don't really know if that's having any effect. so many things are changing at the same time now. That's another in our food system, right? Not only are the prices changing, but the amount of food in the same size packaging is changing, right? And so that makes it even harder to pay attention to what the actual prices are. I think that there's certainly some real interesting challenges that we're seeing related to fresh fruits and vegetables. Of course, the prices of those are related, I think, a little bit more closely. I'd have to check this to fuel prices because of transport and refrigeration and all the needs, all the things you need to do to keep those foods fresh and transport them long distances. But again, we could do that math if the whole system were a little bit more transparent. I think it's important to note that, our food should cost sort of a mixture of the social and environmental costs of producing it, right? And for a long time, the reason we have unsustainable food systems is because they haven't reflected the actual environmental costs, the degradation that some industrial practices cause. And so if we can actually make food prices more transparent, we can also do some work on making our food systems more sustainable.
So that's Philip Loring, who's an adjunct professor at the U of S. We're with Keith Willoughby, who's the Dean of Edwards at the School of Business at the U of S. Keith, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. What would greater transparency look like? How much would that help consumers who are trying to budget and understand why food prices are the way they are?
I think Philip has a phenomenal point that he makes in terms of transparency. I think what happens with transparency is you increase visibility. And when you increase visibility, you give consumers information. When you give consumers information, not that they necessarily have agency then in terms of the decision they make, but at least they go into it with eyes that are more wide open than they would be otherwise. I would think back to years ago when you may remember that when we were concerned with fuel prices, and we still are in the country, but often the gas stations would have a little a decal they would post on the fuel pumps to show this cost of a $1.20 liter of a gas or $1.50 or whatever. Here's how it's divided up in terms of taxes, profits, different costs and input materials and the like. I think something like that would be beneficial for a grocery price to at least have a consumer be aware of opportunities that exist. I think, again, that transparency would be beneficial. The other point I might make, Alicia, to really maybe round this out in terms of what we're seeing recently is, and I don't have data to suggest it, but my anecdotal evidence is a lot fewer of us in Canada now are growing our own food. If we think back 30, 40 years ago, maybe this is due to the urbanization of the country, but 30, 40 years ago, a lot of us might have grown our own vegetable garden, or we had different things that we could grow ourselves. I think now fewer consumers are growing their own food, which makes us more reliant on the grocery stores. And maybe that's helping to fuel some of the challenges that we see and the anxieties and the frustration when prices begin to increase. And we have, as Philip said, very little information or transparency to guide our overall analysis of the situation.
So interesting. It makes me think, I don't think I grew up eating avocados. Now there's an expectation that I should be able to buy cheap avocados. That's a great segue to our next expert here, Keith. So Rachel Engler-Stringer is a professor in community health and epidemiology at the U of S, and one of her main areas of research is food access. She is able to talk about new data on how people are doing in Saskatchewan when it comes to buying groceries. I asked her how food prices are affecting people here.
If we look at the data around household food insecurity specifically, so this is people's ability at the household level to access the food they need to be healthy. And so that is related to finances. So if we look specifically at food insecurity, which tells us a little bit about how people are experiencing the rising prices, we see that there has been a fairly significant increase in household food insecurity over the last few years. And it has risen fairly dramatically since pre-COVID. So if you look at data from 2019 compared to 2023, which is the data that was just recently released from the Canadian Income Survey, the jump in terms of people in Canada experiencing household food insecurity has gone from 6,098,000 to 8,690,000. So we're talking about an increase in about 2.6 million people. That is a very large increase in a very short time period. And then in Saskatchewan, actually, the data is very dramatic, more so than other provinces. So this latest data is it goes by province. All the 10 provinces, doesn't include the territories. That data is released separately. But if you look at the provinces, Saskatchewan has seen the largest increase of any of the 10 provinces. So an increase of 7.7%. We now are at a point where 28% of the population is struggling to access the food they need. And that is a pretty stark situation.
What do you think is behind that number? Is it the rising price of groceries? Does it have to do with how much money people are bringing in? I'm thinking about social assistance rates. I'm thinking about minimum wage. What do you think is behind that 28%?
I think it's all of the above. I think that's part of what the challenge is. So the cost of living has increased. So the cost of rent, the cost of people's mortgages, those have gone up significantly. So housing costs have gone up. The cost of virtually all of the things that we access day to day, and especially food. Food has gone up disproportionately compared to other sectors. And then, of course, our incomes have not kept up. So I was just checking the minimum wage because I always like to remind myself of where we're at. Like if you look at minimum wage in Saskatchewan, we are currently tied for the lowest among the provinces at $15 per hour. Alberta has the same minimum wage as us, so tied for the lowest. And that's minimum wage. I mean, minimum wage is not something that people can live on. So typically, if you have a minimum wage job, in order to have enough to make basic ends meet, you would need to be working significantly more than 40 hours a week, so more than full time.
What does it look like to be food insecure? I'm wondering if you can paint a bit of a picture so that we can better understand, better grasp what that 28% actually represents.
Yeah, so I mean, it exists to degrees. So in the sort of early stages, sort of the what we call marginal food insecurity, it looks like buying a narrower range of foods. So buying foods that are less expensive, lots of pastas, things that are quite relatively cheap to buy, not a lot of vegetables and fruit, not a lot of dairy products. What meat you would purchase is of poor quality, so often very, very highly processed meat products. And then as it gets more and more severe, we start to see more serious compromises in quality. So meals that don't look like a meal per se. So just eating noodles, for example, those sorts of things. So becoming food that doesn't really kind of make sense to us as far as the way we would typically eat. And then when it gets into its severe form, we're talking about skipping meals, skipping whole days of food, and so on. And in this, and I think this is really important to talk about, is the differences between parents and children. So in households with children, households with children are more likely to be food insecure. Single parent households are even more likely to be food insecure. But with households with children, what will typically happen is that parents will protect their kids. So kids will eat when parents are not eating. So in the more severe forms, kids will likely be compromising, but will still get some food to eat. Maybe poor quality food, but food. And parents might be skipping whole meals or skipping entire days worth of food.
Because the start of this show is really about the Loblaw's boycott, and it's given us this opportunity to look more broadly at the issues here. And so I am wondering, would more competition help people access more affordable food? If we had more players in the grocery market, would that bring prices down for people?
Yeah, it's a good question. This is maybe less my area of expertise than others because the industry is not so much. It's more the experience that I study. But if you look at places in the world where there is more competition, there often are lower prices. So at least to the degree that I understand it. So competition certainly matters. It also matters in terms of other aspects of accessing healthy food. So, we've talked a lot about here in Saskatchewan about that our grocery stores are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're in fewer and fewer parts of the city. So there's also this whole other issue of where people can access food, how much time and energy and so on that they end up putting into getting to the grocery store, and other resources that could be used in other ways, going to, say, having to take a taxi home, maybe walking to a grocery store and taking a taxi home, and that $20 is, those are dollars that are then you're not able to spend on food if you don't have access to a car. So it's complicated, but as far as I understand it, the more competition there is, the better placed we are as people who are purchasing food to be able to get some better prices.
The issue of access, there have been some critics who have said, okay, it's easy for some to boycott Loblaws, but for others, that may be the closest grocery store. And a lot of people say, well, that sometimes they do have the cheapest groceries. And so I'm just wondering your thoughts on that, and some of the conversations that have taken place about how it takes privilege sometimes to boycott a certain grocery store.
Yeah, and I agree with those critiques. I mean, I do think that most of the discount stores, if you're looking specifically at the lowest cost food that we have available to us here within Saskatoon or within Saskatchewan, they're often stores within the Loblaw's chain. And then in addition to that, there's, depending on what's closest to you and so on. So I think the way I like to talk about this is, if you are in a situation where you have sufficient funds and privilege to be able to boycott, those are the people who I think, are best placed to do so. So, I'm an academic who likes to make things personal. Personally, I try to choose to support little guys wherever I possibly can when it comes to the grocery industry, because I believe that having a more, robust, larger numbers of players in the market, it benefits all of us. And I have, I have the ability to be able to do that. So those of us who do, perhaps we're the ones who should be making those choices.
Do you think this boycott could shed light on some of the issues that you've just brought forward? Again, I want to bring it back to the fact that there's a very high number of people who are struggling to access healthy food. And so do you hope that this Loblaw's boycott, that maybe something can come of it that raises awareness about the issue?
I do, but I think, really the issue is one of, I think there needs to be intervention by government. I think this is part of the problem, is that up until now, the way that we have chosen to address the problem is through the goodwill of the industry. For lack of a better term, it's we want you to do better is basically the way that things have been approached. And I don't think that works, and I don't think it's going to work. I mean, the point of any grocery chain is to make money for shareholders, or if it's family owned, then the family, but typically it's shareholders. That is its purpose. And so it's going to do that. So things like a windfall tax, which has been put in place in other countries, even the UK, these exist. We need to legislate so that we don't continue to be in this situation.
That is Rachel Angler-Stringer, a professor in community health and epidemiology at the U of S. We've got Keith Willoughby, the dean of the Edwards School of Business at the U of S. Keith, a windfall tax, the government has the ability, they could tax certain industries at a higher rate if they're making large profits. I am curious for your thoughts on that. What is the role of government when it comes to grocery prices in Canada?
I think in the Canadian context, governments are rightly positioned to be able to help consumers be in a better position. We in Canada, through our history as a nation, our culture in terms of the officials we elect, I think in Canada we see ourselves as where we want the government to be enablers of the success and the opportunity for consumers. So as Rachel pointed out, the opportunities of government intervention in these areas, to me, would be opportunities that would be well-founded in terms of being able to provide perspectives on this issue, to be able to at least enable information to be at the hands of the consumers. I would see opportunities that I don't view it as restricting business, I view it as enabling success for all and being able to have a situation where rather than having a really a mysterious situation, I think governments could provide opportunities for enhanced information sharing to make consumers then more informed as they go forward in these important decisions.
Oh, I have follow-up questions on some of that because, a lot of the conversation is focused on how do we bring another large retailer into the grocery scene, which some people say might help bring down prices. But if you're trying to create an inviting business environment, I think Galen Weston made it pretty clear. They're a company, and a successful company turns a profit. So what is the balance in people are really angry at the large profit that Loblaw is making? So what's the balance?
That's a wonderful question because food, again, is that item that we all need. To me, I often view this differently than, say, an airline making profit or a hotel chain making profit, because you and I as consumers, we can decide not to travel on an airplane or we can decide not to stay in a hotel, but you've got to have food. To me, it's that pure, inelastic good that you have. I think that's where we as society need to identify what's that balance between a company earning a reasonable profit to ensure its future sustainability, to provide a return for its shareholders, versus being seen as inflicting harm and distress upon the very consumers of the country.
Would more competition help bring prices down? I'm thinking of our province. We have co-op here. Has that helped bring prices down at all? I guess, the first question is just in general, would more competition help bring prices down?
In general, in theory, yes, Alicia, more competition would enable success. Again, we've gone from 8 major players in the 1980s. Now in this situation, 40 years since, we've gone to a situation now where there are 5 major players. So yes, more competition would help. I think one of the challenges we would need to overcome as a country is just the recognition of the geography that is Canada. We are the second largest country on the planet with a population the size of California. So we are sparsely populated. As Rachel said, our cities, especially in Western Canada, can be several hours apart. And in some of those cities, grocery stores can be far away from where people are actually living. Because we've got this sparse geography, I think that's where I would look to governments to provide some interventions that can enable players in the marketplace to have opportunities of at least planting the seeds of success, because it can be challenging for a new player to enter the market and to enable those operational efficiencies to be successful when we've got a very large country that's sparsely populated. A lot of us might think back to a decade ago when Target came into Canada. Now, they didn't sell grocery products per se, but that was an example of an American player coming into the marketplace that maybe didn't do their homework correctly in terms of supply chain, and they had a very public failure in terms of their ability to be a player in the marketplace. So it's not as simply as easy as opening up the tap and here come competition. I think we would need to enable opportunities of success and platforms of success for those new entrants as they enter the market, because Canada does present some challenges when it comes to providing that competition. Again, that all needs to be weighed against what our consumers actually need, because it is dire circumstances right now with some of our food options and food pricing availabilities.
Yeah, we're going to hear from people who are working on the front lines with folks who are trying to access healthy food. We'll get to that in a moment. Our guest today is Keith Willoughby. He's the Dean of the Edwards School of Business at the U of S. And we've got a caller on the line. So let's go to James next in Saskatoon. Hi, James.
Hi, how's it going there today?
Yeah, pretty well. What's on your mind as you hear us talk about grocery prices?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. You almost preface it by saying that the consumer has rights and responsibilities, right? And that it's almost the mean and industrialized company that's to blame here. So what's the responsibility of the consumer? You know, there was a time, I think sometimes I maybe I get passionate about this, but because I am a byproduct of the Depression, I still think, because I lived of a time where we were poor, we were very poor, but we took it upon ourselves to be self-sufficient. So your guest will speak about the sparseness of our country. That is true. That has not changed in the last 200 years. But we are blessed with a lot of resources. We can go to a watering hole and go fishing. We can go out and we can go hunting. Further to that, there's very easy for us to grab some dirt and throw a couple seeds in the ground and watch a head of lettuce come up, or cabbage for that matter. And that's the one thing that frustrates me to no end, that all of a sudden it's the industry itself that is to blame. Let's think this through a little bit. So keep it simple. If we bring in a foreign competitor, how does that improve Canadians' lot? How does that? Because all of a sudden now we maybe have cheaper prices, but even in the Saskatoon context, there's a reason why co-op only has a certain market share and is not the dominant player. The items that they bring forward to the customer is not satisfying the need towards the social construct of that. And further to that, in our country, there is how many opportunities for us to have direct-to-producer opportunities. It is very easy for us to walk even out there, half a day's walk, and you could probably find somebody that has a cow that you could buy half a beef or a quarter of a beef. No, seriously.
Yeah.
And the reason I say this is because our society is getting to the point where I will paint a picture for you. I have somebody that is starving, basically starving, comes up to the fence, and a cow walks right in front of them, but can't recognize that that's its food source. So,
yeah,
I think
it's a fair
back
point.
to the rights and responsibility.
Thanks for calling,
Sorry?
James. Thanks. Yeah, and Keith
You're
kind of
welcome.
brought that up at the start, that, a lot of us, we're not growing our own food the way many people did years ago. So it's an interesting thing to think about. I'd like to go to our next guest, who's on the front lines of fighting food insecurity in Regina. Matt Leisel is the executive director of REACH, which stands for Regina Education and Action on Child Hunger. They create affordable and healthy food boxes that people can buy, and they try and set up in areas that can be considered food deserts. Matt joins us on the line right now. Welcome to Blue Sky, Matt.
Thanks for having me.
So how have higher food prices affected you as an organization?
Well, on two ends. On one, we're a purchaser of food and sell that to customers. So we're seeing more of a pinch on our end of, the increasing prices that we have. That's, looking at decisions on how much can we absorb, how much can we pass on to our customers. But we have we have one particular program, our Family Basket, that is specifically for people on social assistance. And we found that people, that's not, those individuals can't really afford to be paying more for that box. So we've had to start limiting the amount of food that we can put into those boxes. And so it's been, some concerns there. And
so people are getting less food when they pick up one of your boxes.
Yeah, specifically for the Family Basket there. Yeah, just because we can't increase the price on that one. On some of our other programs, we do have a bit more flexibility to change our pricing. But again, with the way social assistance rates have been, it's just not an option for there at that point. And
yeah, I'll maybe put the same question to you that I put to Rachel. Is it because of just how much food has gone up, or is it about social assistance rates not keeping up? And her answer was it's a bit of both. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's on both ends that, on social assistance, where people seeing now that utility rates aren't covered and, as the cost of housing continues to rise, those rates aren't keeping up, but yet the cost of the grocery stores is getting to be more and more.
Maybe just tell people what a good food box is, because people may not have experience with this. I used to get the good food box in Saskatoon for years. What is it?
So it's a box of fruits and vegetables that we pack once a week here at our location, and then we send those boxes out to pickup depots all over the city. So currently we have 18 different depots in the city, so people can order the box ahead of time and then pick it up at the location that's closest to them. And typically, customers can see up to 50% savings off what they would get on the same items in the grocery store. It is a set box of vegetables, but we do change up the items week to week to provide some variety and ensure we can put as much food as possible into them. And like I said, we have them in lots of different neighborhoods in the city to have it close to home for lots of people. Yeah.
Are you trying to target certain areas in the city? And maybe your system is different than Saskatoon. Saskatoon's was open to anybody. You didn't have to, it wasn't just people who were on social assistance. It was open to anybody. So how does it work in Regina? Are you trying to target certain areas of the city that don't have as many grocery stores?
So the Good Food Box program is open to everybody. So the family basket's a bit different for our people on social assistance. But the Good Food Box, typically we've kind of, the pickup depots have been targeted more in core areas or areas where there aren't other grocery stores. But the demand we're seeing more and more people interested in that. And so we've been expanding out to more and more places across the city and trying to reach as many people as possible. And for us, I mean, the more customers that we have, the more people we have buying Good Food Boxes, it helps increase our purchasing power, which, can help us pass those savings on or increase the amount of food that we're giving out.
The family baskets, are you trying to get those outside of the city at all to any First Nations communities?
Our Good Food Box, we have about 9 First Nations communities that we work with on our Good Food Box. And so we see a lot of them, every month. And that's been a great part of our program. They've been great customers. And, we're working with them as well to see how we can expand and grow that as well to those communities.
What's it like in some parts of Regina to go shopping for food? Boycotting a grocery store chain implies that people have some kind of alternative place where they can go and get groceries. So what are you seeing when it comes to the choices for people in some neighborhoods in Regina?
I think a lot of it's just the lack of choice that's out there in a lot of neighborhoods for, it's been mentioned earlier about the transportation issue that people have. We've said in some ways, sometimes our biggest competitor is Dollarama, in that's where a lot of people are going to find, because, in some cases, those stores are closer to some of the core neighborhoods, have food at, pretty affordable rates, although it is typically shelf-stable, highly processed, food that's there.
Giant Tiger would be another one, probably, hey?
Yeah, that's another one we see there. So I think it's again, people they're forced to go to what's near to them, with whether they can afford transit, whether it's taking, public transit or a taxi or whatever, that all eats into, as Rachel mentioned earlier, eats into their budget on what they can afford for food.
Yeah. Are you able to provide some delivery options for people? Because transportation is a major problem for some people, either because of mobility issues or they have a lot of kids and it's hard to get out and get groceries when you're taking the bus. So do you have delivery options for people?
Not on our Good Food Box program, but that's why we have so many different locations there. Like I said, 18 different locations to pick up. Our family basket for those on social assistance, we do provide home delivery for that. And we also have frozen meals here as well that are very popular with seniors that we provide home delivery for as well. And
you have plans to expand, especially your mobile stores?
Yeah, we've been looking at it. We're actually here May 16th. We're going to be opening up a store at the Regina Open Door Society. So looking at there, and particularly on the mobile stores, it's an issue of funding. They're pretty, they're more staff intensive on having the staff to be able to pack up, set up, and everything there. So we're not a big plan to expand there, but our Good Food Box, we're definitely looking to get to more depots across the city. As I said, working with our First Nations partners, looking to get to more communities there as well.
I appreciate getting this window into the work that you do and the people that you serve. And obviously, we're talking to you today on a show where we're taking a look at the Loblaw boycott. So I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind just zooming out for a moment and kind of summarizing this moment when it comes to food prices and how that's affecting people. Based on what you see, how would you describe the situation right now?
The biggest thing that stands out to me is just, what happened right at the start of the pandemic, where people were seeing empty grocery shelves. And now, and as Keith's mentioned, food is that absolute necessity that everybody must have. So this is something that is affecting everyone. Nobody is immune from the high cost of food right now. And so I think there's, and you see Loblaw is becoming really the lightning rod in a lot of ways on this. And then I think people are just frustrated. They don't know what to do about it. They don't know where to go. Government talks a lot about it, but hasn't had a lot of action. And so that's where I think these boycotts kind of come up as a way, because people are frustrated, they're upset, and they're not sure. And again, all through the show, there's been talk about the complexities of this, the complexities of the food chain, of vertical integration with companies, with transportation to grocery stores. It's income inequality. All these things are very complex issues. So it's hard to point to something and say, well, if we just did this, we could fix it. And people are, taking these things, acting out in these ways because they're frustrated and don't know what else to do.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I've really appreciated you being with us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
That is Matt Leisel, the Executive Director of REACH, which stands for Regina Education and Action on Child Hunger. We've got a couple of callers on the line. Vicky joins us right now in Regina. Hi, Vicky.
Hello. I just want to call in today I'm participating in the Loblaw boycott, and there's been lots of talk earlier in the show about competition being, maybe part of the solution to bring down grocery prices. And I think the thing that I'm frustrated about, and one of 3 reasons I'm participating, is that just corporate greed, like the millions and millions of dollars that CEOs of these companies, not just Loblaw's, I'm sure the Sobeys company has similar numbers, but Loblaw's are, like Matt said, the lightning rod right now. The fact that we just accept that these men deserve to make, millions and millions of dollars a year. And I think that's as a society, that's unacceptable. And that as citizens, we're fed up that, we can barely afford to purchase our groceries to feed our families. And these people, we just accept that, well, of course, CEOs make this much. Of course, shareholders deserve these big dividend payouts. CBC did an article maybe last week, that Loblaw's made $13.58 billion in revenue in the first quarter. And so I know that's not necessarily profit for shareholders, but it's still an extreme, these numbers are massive that we're talking about.
Yeah, they're hard to wrap your head around.
Also it's just, and it's part of it is that how much of our income we're spending on feeding ourselves and, buying prescriptions and, healthcare stuff, like all the things that Loblaw sells us. And I think the other thing that I just feel, I feel excited about in this moment in May, like other people have mentioned, I have the ability and the capacity, I have both energy and money to shop local a little bit for a month. Loblaw's is in my neighborhood. It was my store I went to, several times a week. But now I'm pushing myself a bit further to check out local options, to check out community supported agriculture options, to try small stores that I haven't, I don't frequent that much for my bigger shops.
And how are you finding the prices?
I just want to say one more. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just was curious. How are you finding the prices?
Comparable. Yeah. Comparable. I'm like a big budgeter. I pay attention to where my money goes. And yesterday I did a big shop at Co-op, and certain things cost more, but certain things are comparable or less. And so I was it's, it's not a huge, I understand for families who are on a much tighter budget, it can, this might not feel true, but for a few dollars more to support, Lakeview Fine Foods in Regina, or Co-op, or one of the many Asian grocery stores that has produce and grocery needs, to me it feels kind of worth it. It's about habit building right now. So I'm using this month to break the habit of the easy one-stop shop and getting a bit more diverse in
you wanted
in
to
my
make
shopping.
You wanted to make one more point. I had jumped in there, but you had something else you wanted to say.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say the other reason, that really drew me to this, to do the boycott, is that things feel really hopeless. And I think part of that is frustration with billionaires. I think part of that is witnessing a genocide unfold. And I think that lots of people are what can I do? And the people who started this boycott are here's one thing. And it's not so hard. It's really accessible, and for most people. And I think that that's a really beautiful thing to build hope, because when you're feeling anxiety around the myriad of things in the news, taking action and doing something, even a small thing, spending $50 less at a Loblaw's in May is still, is activism and is doing something that can kind of alleviate that disenfranchised, this sort of, I am not a citizen, I am simply a consumer kind of feeling that I feel like many folks in my world right now have expressed feeling. So, yeah, I appreciate that you folks did the show today. I think it's a really good discussion.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the fact that you picked up the phone and called. So thanks, Vicki.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye. Let's go to one more caller. Chris in Regina joins us right now. Chris, what do you think?
Good afternoon, Alicia. Good topic for a program. I think it's perhaps a bit ironic that Loblaw's is the target of this boycott. I comparison shop. I shop at a variety of places, so I have a good sense of what prices are at the different stores. And the reality I've seen is that typically the Loblaw's-based stores, Superstore, the No Frills, places like that, have the best prices. You look at the prices in Safeway and Sobeys on most items, and they are significantly higher. Loblaw's is probably getting all of this attention because it's a Canadian company, and the information about their profits and so forth, is covered by Canadian media. But it would be interesting to know what kind of profit Safeway has made, in the last year, or Sobeys. One issue, though, I do have with Superstore is that they've consistently misrepresented their policy about discounting items. They consistently say, yeah, we discount things 50%, when in reality you go into a lot of their stores and it's hard to find a 50% discounted item. It's more like 30%. Yet they consistently push that 50% is their number. The other thing is that they have basically now forced people to use the Flash Foods app to get those discounted products. And the people that I think most need or could benefit from reduced prices are probably the ones least able to take advantage of that food app, because you have to have a cell phone, you have to download the app. Older people may not be tech savvy. Yeah. People who are on lower income may not have a cell phone, or even if you've got an older phone, like I have an older phone and I can't download the app. The other thing about the Flash Food app is that basically you have to pay in advance, and then you show up, and if the product is not suitable, then you have to go through the process of getting a refund, which is just annoying and awkward. And I really disagree with the way they're handling that. So that's my 2 cents worth for today.
Well, thanks for that, Chris.
Right.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.
It's Chris in Regina. I'm going to read an email here from Keith, who writes, I do most of the grocery shopping, and so I'm always checking prices and find that Superstore is usually less expensive, so I'm not boycotting them. My children are boycotting them. Also, at least once a week, I see people walking out with all their groceries and not paying. I've asked customer service about that, and they say they can't do anything about it. Yeah, that's a tricky one, Keith. It's something we've covered at CBC before, and just the challenge that grocery stores face with that, and also, questions that come up about whether or not, people really needed that food. So I appreciate you writing, Keith. We've also been seeing several media organizations reporting that there's these posters popping up in Toronto and Atlantic Canada declaring that May 12th is Steal from Loblaw's Day. Controversial, obviously, and against the law as well. But that's been interesting to watch how the whole conversation continues to unfold. We've had Keith Willoughby with us today, the Dean of the Edwards School of Business at the U of S. Keith, I have one last question for you. We've covered a lot of ground, a whole lot of ground. I'm curious, what do you think this boycott can accomplish?
Excellent question, Leisha. Maybe it's me being a bit of a pessimist when I look at how this could move us to sort of that better situation. In my mind, I think it would have limited impact in terms of Loblaws, and not that I discount all the advocacy and the activism that can be created. And I think that's really important. And I appreciate the opportunity that the consumers are talking about it. But to me, I think a limited boycott at one chain is going to have limited impact because, as we said in the show, this is an essential item, and if a Loblaw's outlet is the one that's nearest to you, sometimes you're almost constrained to be able to go there. I think it would have limited impact. What I wish I could see, if I could wave a magic wand and have something happen, I know it's really unlikely for us to have more competition tomorrow, but just if we could have more information. I think more information in terms of how prices are determined, so the Canadian consumer gets the ability now to be a true agent, so they can actually see how things are happening. To me, that information will lead to better insight, more knowledge, and make us more aware. And to me, I think that's something that would be really easy to do. Companies have that information. I think now we need to actually go to the advocacy and ensure that can actually be conveyed to the consumer.
Yeah. Is it climate change? Is it fuel costs? Is it shrinkflation? Mm-hmm. We hardly even talked about shrinkflation, which we could do a whole other segment on. Keith, it's been great having you here. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for your time, Leisha.
That's Keith Willoughby, the Dean of the Edwards School of Business at the U of S. I'm Leisha Gravinsky. You've been listening to Blue Sky here on CBC Radio 1, 540 AM across Saskatchewan, 94.1 FM in Saskatoon, 102.5 FM in Regina.